about, but
It's not.
Okay, let's bring it back. Welcome back to POVz. I'm so excited to bring us to the segment where we start introducing perspectives from the larger Gen Z community. Part 1, we got to hear from your points of view and what got you here in this topic. And now let's bring in some other POVs. You ready?
Yes, absolutely.
It might be a little spicy, but
I'm excited.
4 fire emojis on top of everybody's head getting ready for fury.
1000%. Okay, the first POV says, every time a self-proclaimed mental health advocate comes on my For You page, I can't help but roll my eyes. Try telling someone who's homeless or struggles with addiction to just use a meditation app or take a mental health day. Let's focus on people who are actually in need. Agree, disagree?
I agree to an extent. I think that there's this whole point around access that we talk about when it comes to being able to give these folks who are struggling or are in these overlooked groups different resources that are able to support their mental health. But at the same time, with all the activists, it leads into that whole conversation around, is this activism or are they portraying things that they don't have a lot of knowledge on, especially in the mental health space?
Yeah, and I think going off of that point, you don't necessarily need to be an expert to be a mental health advocate. I think you can share your story and be brave and be vulnerable with using I statements. I feel like a lot of folks on the For You page talking about mental health have these really general blanket statements that can be really harmful, and they try to direct people to do something just only based from their own experience, which I agree with that. I think it can be really dangerous. So
I mean, I think it's tricky in the Gen Z space, right? When so many people luckily are using their voices to stand up for what they believe in and open up about their mental health struggles. But at the same time, a lot of advocates are lacking that clinical knowledge. Is that worrisome to you? What are your thoughts?
So as someone who is a creator, as someone who is an advocate, an activist, whatever you want to label me, I am definitely guilty of being one of those faces on that person's For You page. But I think that the context is really important. And I think how folks adopt the language, and I think that's what we're trying to get here, right? Like how you adopt the language and how you are talking to people is so incredibly important. Like, right, we all know language is powerful, words are powerful. And I think that a lot of times we see these activists, advocates being very much like, you need to do this. Here are 5 things that you can do to be better. This is why you have ADHD. And I think, to Jasmine's point, we're also using a lot of you, because why? It makes people feel heard, and you're going to get more views, you're going to get more likes. And so people curate their feed and they shift away from the activism to being primarily a content creator where they're optimizing, they're focusing on SEO. And I think that removes the advocacy piece. I am someone who shares from my personal experience. I say, this is what I learned in therapy. This is what I've been doing because my therapist told me to do it. This is how I set boundaries with my mom. I'm not telling anyone what to do, what not to do. I'm just starting that conversation.
But even when we're having the conversation about personal experience, there is a point at which it becomes dangerous. When people are speaking directly on their personal experience, having some kind of mental health disorder, for example, ADHD and autism are very prevalent on like TikTok and YouTube, and discussing their symptoms or even just very niche experiences as being a part of a whole, as a part of a whole diagnosis, and using that language can be extremely dangerous. It's dangerous because it's almost like we're creating an echo chamber, really, of people who have these conditions being given more of a platform to speak than those who are legitimately professionals.
Ignorance sometimes is bliss because we're surrounded by so much information, rabbit holes of misinformation, rabbit holes of wrongly categorizing mental health disorders. Well, where is the ability to, for once in our lives, have tunnel vision to the right information? The answer is we can't. And back to the individual's question, are we focusing on those that are homeless and those that are overlooked? Well, there's resources.
Yeah, I think this person's question really calls us in to reflect on ourselves, to hold ourselves accountable and see there's other perspectives and other points of views outside of our own. We might not all be personally houseless. We might not all personally experience food insecurity or all of those things, right? But we also have, at least personally to me, like an obligation to see what can we do about those things if we have the ability to and if we have the power to do that.
Activists are expected to be superheroes, You can't fight for every single issue and be knowledgeable on every single issue. What you can do is create a space where people can have these conversations and you can share what you do know and what can be helpful to people. But we can't intersect every single issue. And I don't think that activists should be expected to do so.
I disagree. I think that it's really important to have an intersectional lens when you're approaching something. Just because you
100%.
again, you can't just only speak from your perspective, right? Especially
Yeah, I
if
totally agree.
your identities don't intersect with a lot of different things. I agree that advocates and activists shouldn't be held responsible for every possible thing under the sun. But I think if you have a platform and you have people listening to you, it is a personal responsibility to learn more outside of your own sphere.
I think I might have phrased this wrong
No, it is
because
not
what
Now you're getting attacked.
what I intended to say is that you can't expect people, not that people shouldn't be educated on like other issues, but that you can't solve every single problem. For example, if we're redirecting the conversation toward homelessness or other like food insecurity conversations, we have the discussion of mental health and we can isolate that just for a moment so that we can do good for people who need good in that area.
Yes.
And so I think that the expectation that every person with a platform can be simultaneously working to solve and perfectly fight every single issue that they might just not have expertise in, I think it's fallacious.
Well, it makes me wonder if today's day and age, it's just far more universal for everyone to have a voice and a platform and an opinion, which is something we explored a lot here at TC. But it reminds me of another point of view that I want to bring up. It's from Bella in our community. It says, let's be real, your friends can never be your therapists. And I mean, I'd love to know your thoughts. And I know the two of you are not only friends, but you're also romantically involved with each other as partners. How do you navigate that if you're ever having a hard moment with your mental health and you want to be able to confide in each other? Like how have you navigated that, and do you agree with that point of view?
I think it's really important to check in to see where your partner or your friend's capacity is at, and also making sure that your partner or your friend is not your only support system and that there's other ways for you to cope, because there's absolutely no way, I think you might have said this earlier, one person should be everything to you. That they're the only person you can go to about a certain thing. Especially in romantic relationships, it's really important to have again, other systems of support in place. So if you have a therapist, that's really helpful. If you have other groups of friends that you can lean on, that's really helpful. If you have like somatic tools that you can use, like yoga or meditation, like those are all really helpful. And so I feel like I obviously really love him and like I want to support him, but I can't always be there and I don't always have the capacity.
Your friend can't be your therapist goes back to setting boundaries and communicating and acknowledging your capacity, acknowledging how you can show up, how you can't show up. That's relevant romantically, and that's especially relevant in our friendships.
It's that idea that this terminology of therapist, it's more support system, like you said. Your friends are your support system. You would feel weird if you were very closed off and you just said fine or I'm good. Like, you want to have those conversations and you want them to be involved in your struggles and your wins and your boring days like we have that we don't talk about. But I think that no, I don't necessarily agree with the idea that it's your friend is your therapist, rather your support.
Your friends can't be your therapist. Like, and I mean that in the most literal sense. They are simply not qualified unless they literally are a therapist. Where it does become an issue is when that becoming a support system turns into trauma dumping and trying to like escape awkward situations where you don't really know how to help someone because they aren't necessarily looking for help.
I've definitely experienced that, where you've been put in an uncomfortable position and it airs on the side of trauma dumping.
I've definitely had that experience where folks have slid into my DMs being vulnerable because, you know, when they don't have access to trusted resources, they see us and that's the first word, we become their first go-to,
You're
right?
the gateway.
Exactly. And so I've definitely had that. And sometimes it appears as though the other person might be in a crisis, and navigating that through DMs is incredibly hard, but tapping into my network, contacting the professionals in my life and asking them how to navigate that has been really critical for me. I will also say that romantically, I'm definitely guilty of dumping, whether I'm just excited or whether I'm going through it, right? And so also learning to ask my partner, hey, like, what's your capacity? Or like, oh, you're working right now? Like, when can you talk? Right? And that's an ongoing lesson. That's something I'm always figuring out. I know you mentioned at some point having a similar experience as well with the DMs and navigating that.
Yeah, I think a lot of times I'm very open about being queer in the military, and people either on social media, like the other day, somebody messaged me and they're like, hey, I saw you in public and I really wanted to come up to you and have a full-blown conversation, but I respected your space. And I was like, thank you. But other times you get those people being like, hey, I'm in the military, I'm being discriminated against, people are hurting me for being queer. As somebody who's experienced discrimination from my hometown, it's super personal for me. And I'm sure sometimes with all of you, if people reach out to you at personal struggles, you feel like that sense of obligation. Because not only that we're activists, we're good humans and we want to help. But a lot of times I've had to pull back and be like, look, I don't have the capacity, like you all have explained, like to always be there. And that's something that me as a service member, I always want to, sounds cliche, but serve everybody. And sometimes you can't. And sometimes, a lot of times, I do not have all the right or all of the answers.
Which is valid. And I just want to, exactly. And I just want to throw in, it's so important that you're getting the support that you need. I think it's important for each of us to explore that. And if it's okay, I'd love to share another perspective from one of the interviews that we did, actually the day I met Jorge. It comes from Gracie, who's incredible. So here, come close. I'm going to play this.
Whenever you're experiencing anxiety, depression, instead of directly going to get meds, look at the root problem for any anxiety, like, or any mental illness that you're experiencing, because a lot of the times those meds are really just trying to numb you and you never get to the root of what it is. So take into consideration like healing practices, somatic, breath work. There's so many other ways for us to heal. Yes, if you need meds, please get them, but also look beyond that. Like, don't stop at just meds and call it a day.
Does anyone disagree with that?
I agree with it on most accounts, but she said, like, once you get on meds, if that's the right choice for you, to not stop there. But while I do think that self-exploration is really important and natural, for some people, it absolutely is the end of the road. A lot of the time, for people with anxiety specifically, the medication is the right option, and therapy won't actually do too much more. And a lot of the time it can be really costly and it's just unnecessary.
I've taken medication for depression, and also have tapped into somatic tools that have really helped me heal in my journey. I would say that I don't know if I would have necessarily been able to get to a place where I could mentally and also emotionally invest in myself in that way, because when I first started medication, I was severely depressed. It was really hard for me to get out of bed. It was hard for me to go to class, just like the daily things that I feel like I should have been able to do, quote unquote. But I think getting on meds was really, again, that gateway for me to feel like myself again, to feel like I could do those things and that I was worth the investment.
Before trying medication, I was in therapy for at least 4 years. And, I was working to address my anxiety. I was working to address my depression. I was learning all the coping mechanisms, being given the tools, the techniques, even being given the worksheets, which never worked for me. But all of that was my way of reflecting and realizing, oh, okay, I've been doing a lot here. So when I got a diagnosis, a formal diagnosis for my ADHD in particular, and was able to experiment with medication with the support of my psychiatrist, I was realizing, to Jasmine's point, how my baseline anxiety is just like on a normal day is like way above the average. And so it was able to help me with all of the ADHD symptoms and byproducts that bring that, again, the comorbidity, bring that baseline all the way up here. And so it was able to bring the baseline to a point where I was able to be more focused, clear-headed, and identify, okay, what do I have to do today? But also, what can I do to support myself today? I think for others, and myself included, medication was definitely a option, and one that I was excited to take because, I needed it at that point.
Thank you for sharing that. If it's okay, I'd love to bring up one more perspective, since we have time. I think it's interesting that today we're talking a lot about just how each of us approaches therapy differently and what works best for us. And I know that gets complicated by everything else that's going on in the world. And I know we're just coming off of another school shooting this week. So I wanted to bring up this perspective to hear your thoughts. It says, boomers do nothing about climate change and school shootings and wonder why we're depressed. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so it's not funny, but it's the boomer targeting
boomer
is
part, yeah.
yikes. Okay, so I don't think that's the reason we're depressed, but I think that a huge piece of this is we're exposed to so much as Gen Zers and, you know, even some younger millennials, all about like, we have information about other countries and other organizations, like Uganda just, you know, had this whole anti-LGBTQ passing, and you're seeing crucifixion of certain groups, and you're seeing violence and hateful rhetoric at what, age 5 when you're given a tablet? So we're exposed to so much, but we can't do much because I think the targeting at boomers or the targeting at congressional members is, okay, there's climate change, there's gun violence. It's causing fear, it's causing trauma, it's causing PTS in young folks. Why is nothing happening?
There's also the additional factor that not to be too closed off to just the COVID time, but we have been extremely socially isolated because we've used networks like social media to simulate these real relationships in a way that feels extremely real. And it's not necessarily that these platforms are doing negative things, because they're absolutely not 100% negative, but they do create a false sense of connection.
I think it's human nature for us to all want to point fingers, right? And say, oh, it's the boomer's fault or it's this person's fault, because it gives us peace, right? To be able to find a root cause of something. But I guess my last question for all of you is, if we're not going to blame the boomers for our depression and our overwhelming mental health concerns as a generation, what do you think the root of the problem is?
Well,
or do we need to have a whole other episode?
No. I was just gonna say,
Probably.
I think kind of continuing the discussion and going into this one, there's obviously no one problem, but I think that we see everything and we see nothing at the same time. And this, take it as you will, but this means various things. It's like we see so much, as already said, but we also don't see the full picture. We don't see the solutions being made. We don't see the folks, boomers are not on the ground doing the work, right? But at the same time, I think it also, like that question, that take calls into question and also brings up the topic of accountability around those in power and their lack of action on certain issues related to gun violence, related to mental health, related to all these different topics.
So I wasn't born here, and I feel like the individualist culture is very, very prevalent in Western society. So I just think that, once you are in community spaces like this one and having these conversations, I feel like you can actually foster and build very genuine, authentic sense of connection to not only other people, but yourself. That's how you form your sense of self. That's how you form your sense of community, is with each other. And I feel like that's something I'm definitely feel like missing a little bit in my life, or I want more of. And I don't know if other people resonate, but that's what comes to mind for me.
I definitely think that the root cause of the problems, now I definitely cannot verify this, but in my opinion, is that we have had such rapid change in the last several years, which a lot of it is positive, but it is rapid change. And when we are not able to feel a part of a community that is changing so quickly, we develop what in sociological terms would be enemy. We have no connection to the society that we are a part of because we don't even recognize it from one day to another. And I think that this change is perpetuated by social media. Even just the conversation of mental health being so much more prevalent has created such interesting effects on young people. And not all of them are positive. And it's, I think, interesting to look at this critically and really consider how we can, as a society, become more comfortable with this new age of rapid change that we've never seen before.
I've
Plus
never
20.
considered
Plus
that
20.
before. Okay, we clearly have so much more to talk about, so let's just take one more quick break and we'll be right back. Wow, I never considered that.
Hey, it's Bella Santos from the Conversationalist community. Thank you so much for watching our POVz episode on therapy. The best part about TC is that we want to hear everyone's points of view, including yours. Just text the word therapy to 1-877-222-1119 to get access to all things TC, and we hope to feature you on a future episode. See you next time!
Lovely.
That's impressive.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the POV show here. I'm Sophie Beren reporting from New
Sophie
York City.
Beren.